All right, so let's dive into something maybe a little different today. You're a philosopher, right? So I'm guessing you spent some time thinking about the building blocks of reality, but have you ever considered tropes?
Not usually something you see on a philosophy syllabus, right?
Exactly, and that's what we're doing today, taking a deep dive into the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on tropes. It might be a bit of a mind bender, even for someone who, knows their way around a syllogism.
Oh, for sure. Tropes definitely offer a pretty unique way of looking at some classic philosophical problems.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What are tropes? Like imagine you've got two apples, and they're both red. But are they the same red? Tropes say, nope. Each one is a unique instance of redness. It's a specific, particularized property.
It's kind of like the difference between the concept of red and the actual experience of red. Think about the redness of like a sunset versus the redness of a stop sign. They're both red, but the redness itself is distinct.
Right, and that distinction is where things start to get interesting philosophically. Because tropes kind of offer a middle ground between two big philosophical camps, universal realism and nominalism.
Exactly.
So with universal realism, you've got this idea that there's like one redness out there, and everything that's red is participating in it.
Right.
And then nominalism is like, nah, it's just a word. We just slap a label on things.
Just a label.
But then tropes come in and say, hold on a sec, there's a bit more to it than that. They acknowledge that, properties are real, but they're specific to each object. It's not some universal redness. It's the unique redness of this apple, and then the equally unique redness of that fire truck.
Yeah, and for a philosopher, this is kind of a big deal because it offers like a potential solution to the age-old problem of the one over many.
Right, the one over many.
Like, how can a bunch of different things share the same property?
Right, how can they all be red?
And tropes say they don't. Each thing has its own instance of that property.
Right. So tropes aren't just a philosophical curiosity. They might actually be a key to unlocking some of the big mysteries in metaphysics.
That's right.
Okay, so let's get into some specific theories about how tropes work. Starting with resemblance class theory. Imagine you have a giant sorting machine for tropes.
Okay.
All the exact same shade of blue tropes go in one bin. All the middle C tropes go in another. It's a way of grouping similar tropes together without needing those universals.
But here's where it gets a little tricky. Doesn't this mean we have to say that resemblance is like a real relation? Like it exists out there in the world?
Yeah.
Because if it is, haven't we just made things more complicated? Added another layer to our ontology?
It's like we've tried to simplify things by ditching universals, but now we have this resemblance thing.
Right.
And what is that exactly?
Yeah, exactly. Some philosophers try to get around this by saying that resemblance is internal to the tropes themselves.
Okay.
It's not a separate thing. It's just part of what it means for a trope to exist.
Okay, so they just naturally resemble each other.
Right? That's the idea behind what we call a sparse ontology. The goal is to have as few fundamental categories of being as possible.
Keep it simple.
Exactly. But the question is resemblance really just a pseudo-addition?
Yeah.
Or are we kind of sneaking a universal in through the back door?
It's a good question. All right, let's flip the script now with natural class theory.
Okay.
So instead of tropes resembling each other first and then forming classes based on that resemblance, this theory says the classes come first.
Ah.
Tropes get their nature from the class they belong to. It's like saying that the reason this apple is red is because it belongs to the Red Things Club.
Yeah, it does sound kind of backwards at first.
Right.
But if you think about it from a philosopher's perspective, we're always wrestling with this relationship between the particular and the general.
The particular and the general.
Right, like does the particular thing get its nature from the general category, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, does the apple make the category or does the category make the apple?
Exactly, and natural class theory says it's the category that makes the thing what it is. So to be red is to belong to that red things category.
So the category comes first.
Right.
But does that really solve the problem? Or does it just like move the mystery somewhere else?
That's the bait. Some philosophers really like this approach because it means you don't have to explain resemblance as like this fundamental relation out there in the world.
Okay.
But others worry that it makes the relationship between particulars and categories too rigid.
Interesting. Okay, so lots to think about there. But get ready because things are about to get even more interesting. We're moving on to trope-kind theory.
Okay, trope-kind theory.
Imagine a world where universals exist, but they're not these big independent things floating out there. Instead, they're kind of like relaxed versions of strict identity, and they emerge from the tropes themselves. So instead of redness existing all on its own, is more like a pattern that comes from all the specific instances of red in the world.
Okay.
It's still real, but it's grounded in the particulars.
This might resonate with the concept of immanent realism, something I'm sure our philosopher listeners will find interesting. It's the idea that universals are real, but they're not separate from the particulars,
Right.
so they're immanent in the particulars.
Okay.
And this ties back into the idea of tropes as those building blocks of reality. You start with these particularized properties, these tropes, and from there you can build up to a more complex concepts like universals.
So we've got these tropes, these vibrant, specific qualities, but how do they come together to create the objects, the things that we experience? Are things just collections of tropes, or is there something more to them? Find out in part 2 of our deep dive into the world of tropes.
Welcome back. So last time we were talking about how these individual properties, like these tropes, come together to form the objects that we experience.
Right.
It's one thing to say that an apple has like, a specific redness and a particular roundness,
Yeah.
but what actually makes those properties, stick together as an apple?
Right. It's like we have all the ingredients for a cake,
Yep.
but no way to bake them into a, cohesive whole.
Exactly. And this is where trope theory starts to deal with the concept of compresence. Like,
Okay.
what is it that binds these tropes together into bundles that we recognize as objects?
Right.
And this is where things get really interesting and maybe a little problematic.
All right. I'm intrigued. Let's talk compresence. So what's the basic idea?
Okay, well, at its simplest, compresence is the relation that holds tropes together. It's like the glue
Okay.
that makes those properties into a unified object.
So it's not just that the apple has a specific redness and a specific roundness. It's that those two tropes are compresent with each other.
Yes.
And that's what makes them part of the same apple.
Exactly. But here's the thing. If compresence is a relation between tropes,
Okay.
and relations are themselves tropes,
Right.
don't we need another trope to explain how the compresence trope is compresent with the other tropes?
Wait. So to explain how tropes stick together, we need another trope?
Yeah.
But then to explain how that trope sticks to the others, we need another trope.
Uh-huh.
And so on forever.
Yeah.
That sounds like a never-ending problem.
That is exactly right. That's what we call Bradley's regress.
Bradley's
It's
regress.
this infinite regress problem, and it pops up in lots of areas of philosophy.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a headache.
It's a big headache for trope theorists.
Okay, so we've got this compresence conundrum. How have trope theorists tried to solve this problem? Like, what are the escape routes?
Okay, well, one approach is to just accept it and say that compresence is internal to tropes.
Okay.
It's not a separate relation that needs explaining. It's just part of what it means for tropes to exist.
So they just naturally cohere.
They just cohere. They naturally go together. It's built into their very nature.
Okay. Like magnets.
Kind of like that, yeah. But of course, any philosophical solution has drawbacks.
Right, of course.
For example, if compresence is internal to tropes, does that limit what's possible? Like, could this specific redness of this apple have existed as part of a fire truck instead?
Yeah. Does that mean that the fate of every trope is sealed from the moment it exists?
It's a good question. It's one that philosophers are still debating. Okay, let's move on to another potential solution.
Okay.
One that tries to add a bit more structure to the idea of compresence. This is the idea of structured bundles.
Right. Structured bundles. What is that?
So think of it like a nucleus surrounded by a halo.
Okay.
The nucleus is made up of these core tropes, the ones that are essential to the object's identity.
Okay.
And then the halo contains more peripheral tropes, the ones that can change without changing what the object is.
So for an apple, the core tropes might be like the redness, the roundness, the apple flavor.
Right.
But the halo could include things like, the specific arrangement of its blemishes or how many leaves are on the stem.
Exactly. Those halo tropes can change without making it not an apple anymore. This helps address some of the rigidity of internal compresence
Okay.
because it allows for some tropes to be more loosely associated with the object.
So we're not talking about compresence as like this all or nothing thing.
No, not at all.
There are degrees of compresence, like different levels of stickiness between different tropes.
That's right.
But doesn't that raise another question, like what determines which tropes go in the nucleus and which ones go in the halo? Seems kind of random.
It's a good point, and it's one that critics of this theory bring up a lot. What's the principle behind that division? Is it based on something about the tropes themselves, or is it more about how we see the world? Lots to think about there, but we've got one more solution to explore.
Okay, hit me with it. What's this last solution?
This one's really interesting. What if, instead of composants being like some mysterious force or an inherent property, it's actually a kind of trope,
Okay.
like a relational trope, and its whole purpose is to bind other tropes together?
So a trope whose only job is to bring other tropes together, it's like the social butterfly of the trope world.
Exactly. But does that actually solve anything, or are we just, relabeling the mystery?
Right, just pushing the problem around.
Yeah, that's what some philosophers argue, but others think it's a pretty elegant solution. It keeps that idea of tropes as the fundamental building blocks of reality,
Yeah.
while still offering a way to account for how they relate to each other.
It definitely has a certain appeal. Instead of needing some outside force or principle, we're keeping everything within the world of tropes. Complacence isn't something different. It's just another trope on the team.
Right. And it opens up some interesting questions about relations in general.
Yeah, like what are relations?
Are all relations tropes? What makes a relational trope different from a regular one?
It's like we've zoomed in on this one tiny problem and suddenly we've discovered a whole universe of new questions.
Exactly.
This is what I love about philosophy. Okay, let's change gears a little bit and talk about how this idea of tropes, how it might affect other areas of philosophy,
Okay.
like perception and causation.
Hmm.
So, like, do we perceive the world directly, or are we only perceiving the tropes of things?
A classic philosophical question. A lot of trope theorists say that we perceive tropes directly, like they point to experiences like seeing a leaf change color.
Okay.
It feels like we're literally seeing the greenness disappear and the brownness appear.
Yeah,
It's like our senses are tuned in to those very specific concrete qualities, not some abstract universal color.
makes sense. Okay, now, what about causation? How do tropes fit into that picture? Cause and effect and all that.
This is where tropes can be really helpful as explanations. It's not the entire stove that burns you.
Right.
It's that specific heat trope of the burner at that particular moment.
Okay.
Tropes seem like the natural way to think about causes because they're particular and they're located in a specific time and place.
Right.
And they have very specific powers and potentialities.
So instead of saying the fire caused the water to boil, a trope theorist might say the heat trope of the fire caused the temperature trope of the water to increase.
Exactly. And this could change how we think about things like the laws of nature.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, maybe those laws aren't about universals. Maybe they're about how specific tropes interact with each other.
Interesting. Like a whole new set of laws of physics, but written in the language of tropes?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From resemblance classes to structured bundles to relational tropes. But I keep coming back to this question, like, what does it all mean? What are the big implications of thinking about the world this way? What does it tell us about reality, about everything?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think the answer depends you know, on your own philosophical perspective. Some people might see trope theory as a way to really ground our understanding of the world in something concrete and specific. A way to get away from those abstract universals.
Yeah.
Others might find it really liberating, like a way to break free from traditional categories and see the world in a whole new way.
Yeah, with all these, vibrant, unique properties.
Exactly.
And for a philosopher, I think that's pretty exciting. It's like we've been handed this new toolkit, a new language to think about some of the oldest questions in philosophy.
That's right.
Okay, well, I want to thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the world of tropes.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all you listeners out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, and until next time.